It is very, very nice to meet you. My name is Chris Marshall. I am a Senior Managing Consultant for the Public Consulting Group Technology Consulting Practice Area. And what I'd like to talk to you about today is the ACA and some of the pitfalls that the ACA experienced on the eve of implementation of marketplaces. I also want to talk to you about enterprise architecture, organizational leadership, and the role that both played, or in some cases didn't play, in the implementation of marketplaces and also in the management of marketplaces after go live. So there's a couple of areas that I kind of want to discuss, and each of these areas speaks specifically to enterprise architecture and organizational leadership with regards to the way that our government currently does business and probably the way that our government probably should do business. So one of the most critical areas in talking about the ACA, specifically exchanges and marketplaces, and we're gonna get down to business a little bit and look at the difference between the two, because there is a substantial differentiation of what those two terms mean. But to give you a basis for the discussion, I need to cover a few of the logistics of how marketplaces and exchanges work. And there is a lay of the land process that I kind of want to go through. I want to talk to you about the roles, I want to talk to you about the definitions, and I want to talk to you about the operational guidelines and the operational procedures, both from a federal level and also at a state level. So let's talk lay of the land. Okay, definitions. So right off the bat, most are aware that exchanges were deemed the flagship of the ACA law, as they are the conduit or the portal that is used to provide access to private health insurance, or more appropriately, QHPs or qualified health plans. The term exchange was replaced late in the development cycle by the term marketplace. Now, to make this conversation a little bit easier, I'll explain the difference between the two terms based on vendor interpretation. So, exchanges are the enterprise structures, they are the people, the human capital, that are responsible for producing each marketplace solution. Marketplaces are the portal systems, the technologies that are available in each state. So, the exchanges are the organizations, or the enterprise. The marketplace is the actual technologies. Before further defining exchanges and marketplaces, let's take a look at the players associated with both. CMS, or the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, is the national umbrella. They're the federal management system for exchanges and marketplaces, and they carry a number of different roles and responsibilities. I've outlined three that are pertinent to our conversation today, specifically the development, administration, and management of the federally facilitated marketplace, which we'll cover in just a moment. The development of the Federal Data Services Hub, which is actually a collection of federal services. They are also the administrators of state exchanges and marketplaces. So not only are they responsible for developing the national initiative, they're also responsible for assisting and monitoring and guiding the development of state exchanges and marketplaces. Roles and responsibilities in the state agency and stakeholder area would be building a state-based exchange, the development, administration, and management of a state-based marketplace, and by that there's several different streams. There's policy development, business development, and obviously solutions or technology development, and interfacing with the Federal Data Services Hub. States do not have to build their own, states cannot build their own data services hub, but they can use the Federal Data Services Hub as long as they remain compliant and they meet all security requirements to interface with the Data Services Hub. And lastly, self-sufficiency. Now, each exchange is supposed to operate as its own business. A certain amount of federal funds were provided to exchanges in order to build up the exchange, to build it's basically like a small business. So they're building up their exchange. Once the exchange is built up, they have to be self-sufficient from a financial standpoint. And finally, we come to vendors and consultants. And my company actually falls under this category. Now, you may be asking yourself, what is it that vendors and consultants do on exchange projects? And that would be a very good question. Vendors and consultants fulfill a substantial role in the development of exchanges. We help to manage the project environment that each marketplace is built within, and we provide procurement services or technical development services, oversight services, which I fall under, and a host of other services. Some vendors are used as staff augmentation. Some provide entire teams from one into the hundreds, all to build marketplace projects. So, returning to operational guidelines or parameters, we've established that marketplaces fall within two primary categories: the federally facilitated kind and the state-based kind. There's one federally facilitated marketplace, which incorporates the development of the national marketplace and the Federal Data Services Hub. State-based exchanges, of which there are 13, are tasked with the development of customized local marketplace solutions designed to connect to and be compliant with the Federal Data Services Hub. Now let's examine the base structure of a marketplace. This is regardless of the type of marketplace. This image illustrates the base functionality of a marketplace. The globe in the middle of the image represents the internet and equates to the user interface or method for accessing the marketplace. The brain at the bottom of the image represents the logic, what we call the rules engine. The safe at the top of the image represents the Data Services Hub. The people to the left represent constituents or users, and the paper to the right represents an insurance policy. The flow is as follows. People apply using the marketplace interface and internet browser. The marketplace application processes that data by sending pieces of that data to the Data Services Hub, which is the safe. Additionally, the application runs an eligibility service, the brain, to determine what type of coverage the people qualify for. A plan selection is made, and a policy, the paper, can then be issued. Breaking the marketplace categories down, we discover 4 distinct types of marketplaces. State-based marketplaces describe states which have established marketplace solutions and manage both the technology and the consumer-related functions. State partnership marketplaces describe states which carry out certain consumer-related functions on their own, like outreach, marketing, and hands-on assistance, but they rely on the federally facilitated marketplace as their actual enrollment system. The newest category, supported state-based marketplaces, are for states that are actually in transition between moving from the federally facilitated marketplace to an actual state-based marketplace technology. Finally, federally facilitated marketplace states are states that have opted to use the federally facilitated marketplace and have no infrastructure to support exchange activities. So one of my absolute favorite topics having to do with the ACA, with exchanges, and with marketplaces is misconceptions. And unfortunately, well, I guess also fortunately, there have been a lot of misconceptions about marketplaces. One of my favorite quotes of all time, and it's been said by so many people, there's no point in me trying to tell you who it was that said it, but one of my favorite quotes is that it's just a website. Everyone says it's just a website. It's a website, and companies like Apple and Google and Amazon do it all the time. Marketplaces are by no means just a website. As far as the way that us as citizens interact, yes, we are interacting with a website, a web page. But as far as what a marketplace actually does and what is involved in building a marketplace, it is very, very, very different than what Amazon does, what Google does, and what companies like Apple do. Besides the fact that there are some vast, vast differences, there's also an added complexity because Apple and Amazon and Google all share a very common element. That's that they're corporations. They're basically machines. They are very advanced engines, and it's kind of like comparing a Ferrari to I don't mean for this to sound insensitive, but it's like comparing a Ferrari to a Ford Taurus. I mean, it's two very, very, very different beasts, and they both have very specific purposes. Not that one is better than the other, but it's hard to compare the advantages of one over the other using one strict baseline. You have to look at it systemically. You have to look at it from exactly what those two different vehicles are supposed to do and what you need. When you are in need of a Ferrari, not that I would imagine that a lot of people are in need of a Ferrari, but the need for a Ferrari is very different than the need for a Ford Taurus. So that's one strain that I think that we should definitely explore because it has a lot of foundation in misconceptions. Aside from it being just a website, there's other misconceptions, specifically about vendors, about SIs, about system integrators, the companies that basically are building the technologies. There's a lot of misconception about them and over what it is they do. There's also a lot of misconceptions about technical professionals that actually exist within government, that technical professionals don't have the level of technical acumen to appropriately perform functions associated with marketplaces and exchanges. And there are reasons why technical professionals may not have the same skills in government that professionals in Amazon and Google and Apple may have. There are very specific and explicit reasons as to why. And those are some of the things that I'd like to explore in this next section. It's just a website. Companies like Google and Amazon do it all the time. It's fair to say that Amazon and Google have mastered the art of web development. What these organizations build are not websites either. They build web-based applications and systems. The term website infers a collection of standalone HTML-esque pages connected like limbs and leaves on a tree. Web applications and systems are advanced technical solutions that are very robust and execute complex processes, and is more akin to an entire forest than a single tree. Marketplaces are complex systems with advanced logical components which interfaces with other complex systems to perform tasks and provide us as consumers with results. Marketplaces are in no way just a website. So let's take a close look at the Ferrari Ford Taurus example from earlier. Now, this was the comparison of companies like Google and Amazon and the Apples of the world to a Ferrari, similar in likeness due to the sheer amount of innovation and the amount of extremely specialized, as in costly, resources needed to keep the engines tuned up. The Ferrari is certainly fancier and can get a person from point A to point B faster and in more style, but the speed limit on the freeway is the same regardless of the type of car you're driving. That's where the term fit for purpose, fit for use comes in. Fit for purpose means is good enough to do the job it was designed to do. Fit for use meaning effectiveness of a design, development method, and support process employed in delivering a system or service that suits the defined purpose under anticipated or specified operational conditions. A Taurus may not be as fancy or as stylish, but it meets the conditions for typical road use, as in freeway and city driving. and does not require extremely specialized resources to maintain. There are things that a Taurus can do that a Ferrari can't, as in hold more than 2 people. Both cars have benefited from innovation. The difference is the path of innovation each took, which is specific to the purpose of that vehicle. Turning to vendors and consultants and why they're necessary. Vendors and consultants are critical in the modernization of existing government systems and the development of new government systems as they specialize in emerging innovation, meaning they design and develop based on the latest industry standards. Vendors and consultants are necessary for government IT initiatives based on the current environment, where they're responsible for system integration, design, developing, testing, and deploying new systems and platforms, project management, managing the overall project activities, or oversight, such as myself. Vendors and consultants perform in all of these areas and many more. However, they are not self-governing. They are self-managing and are governed typically by the agency that contracted them. Vendors and consultants are expert professionals who assist public agencies and organizations in improving and aligning their businesses, specializing in areas that most agencies are unable to fulfill on their own. This allows for remarkable work to be performed throughout the course of a project in tandem with public counterparts. This is to everyone's credit. That being said, the performance of vendors and consultants is a primary concern on any project, technical or otherwise, though vendor performance concerns seem to reach critical mass throughout the design, implementation, and maintenance periods of marketplaces. But there is a misconception that vendors are not held accountable. Numerous contracts were not renewed, and there are instances where contracts were terminated altogether. As an oversight vendor, the quandary vendors face is often the same as that experienced by in-house technical teams, where changes to scope, lack of clarity, and confusion over leadership aims overpower schedule, it overpowers objectives, and ultimately performance. We are as susceptible to problem leadership as any other stakeholder. Turning now to technologists in government. Misconceptions about technical professionals in government suggest that public agencies should employ more people with advanced technical skills. This is quite a paradox. Technical professionals in government agencies maintain skill sets that best equip them to support and modify the types of technology or platforms that their particular environment supports. For some of these agencies I work with, older technologies like COBOL, a programming language that debuted over 50 years ago, is still in use. Innovation stalemates for older technologies because the industry moves on. The Googles and the Amazons and the Apples of the world drive innovation because they can afford to re-platform every few years. They are for profit. Government agencies cannot follow this model as they must stay within a specified budget. When people talk about technologists in public work, they give the impression that government work doesn't pay enough, that if monetary incentives were better, government would attract persons with greater skill sets. But I don't think that's often the case. There are incentives other than money, and there are technologists who are just as interested in what they can do and how they can innovate as they are with a paycheck. Government incentivizing will likely have to go beyond money. Keep in mind that an environment that is stalemated with technologies that are more than 25 years old will have greater difficulty retaining technologists trained specifically in modern technologies. The majority of IT jobs in public agencies are for maintenance of systems, not systems development. This suggests that skill sets of public sector technologists should actually refresh when systems are modernized, not vice versa. So in putting it all together, we've established that government implementations of technologies must be fit for specific use and purpose. We understand that technical professionals in government have skill sets to support their existing environment, and we understand that private industry drives innovation. The turmoil that ensued in the wake of the Marketplace Go Live produced an interesting national discussion about cross-training government technologists with private industry, suggesting that technologists spend several years in private employment and then return to government service to innovate government systems. This is a model that would probably bear some success until said government systems become obsolete. So let's talk about the crux of problem leadership and what leadership meant at the time of Go Live for marketplaces, and also what it means now post Go Live, and also looking at a new enrollment period. There's a lot of different topics that we can cover having to do with leadership, but I'm going to try to hone in and be very specific, especially when looking at some very fundamental questions about exchanges and what actually happened, what went wrong with exchanges. There was one question that was asked during a legislative hearing, and there were many hearings that have happened for the ACA, both at the federal level and also at the state level. But specifically, one of the most important questions was, did exchanges lie? It is a very important question. At the time, there were so many problems that were experienced at Go Live, which, as a technologist, none of the problems seemed foreign to me. They're all problems that we face specifically on or around Go Live. But there's a big difference between the Go Live of marketplaces and the Go Live of normal products and services having to do with IT. So back to the question, did exchanges actually lie? It's a very good question. I don't think that we'll ever really be able to answer the question. I think that there are some exchanges who probably had better intel as far as how their technology was evolving. But to a certain extent, I will say that exchanges probably couldn't have told the difference in a lot of the cases. Some of the states that I was closest to, their line of sight, and there is a line of sight for leadership, the ability to look across your enterprise and understand your enterprise and interpret your enterprise, especially when there are problems, when things start to go wrong. You can physically see it if you're close enough, if your enterprise is close enough, and if you have a clear line of sight across your enterprise. I think that there was a lack of sight for a lot of exchanges. And I'm going to talk in a bit about maturity levels and why it is some exchanges may not have been as aware as they should have. It sounds a little perplexing to say that you wouldn't understand whether or not you actually were in a place to go live with a product or to go live with a service. But it is not foreign, and it's not something that doesn't happen. It actually happens quite often. One of the reasons that we probably don't recognize it is because usually most services, most products, and this includes Apple, it includes Amazon, it includes Google, and Microsoft, most go lives are soft go lives, meaning it's not public. Unfortunately, with marketplaces, they were very, very, very public. And as soon as the lights came on, as soon as that switch was turned on, everybody and their cousin attempted to log on. Some people logged on because they had been waiting for the service. Some people logged on because they wanted to see what the service was going to do. And having to perform like that was very, very difficult for a number of exchanges, and I think that predominantly had to do with line of sight. And I know a lot of people are going to talk about it was a technical issue. The technology was to blame, and honestly, technology was not the paramount issue. It wasn't. The paramount issue was recognition of when things are not running the way that they should be running. A lot of that has to do with the maturity of leadership and the maturity of exchanges as organizations. So let's expose that a little bit. The crux of problem leadership. What leadership meant to go live and what it meant after. So what did go wrong? there are many different ways to have this conversation, but let's focus on some of the primary concerns: quality, capacity, performance, and to be on the safe side, let's throw in security. Quality is a concern because the industry, and I'm sure others close to or in exchanges, would venture to say that more testing would have prevented errors that plagued marketplaces for the months following go live. And then there's also the speculation as to code quality. There were definitely quality, capacity, and performance issues. People couldn't get into marketplaces to browse, much less apply. And though each exchange had to pass a number of security measures, including NIST compliance, there are a number of concerns related to the availability of personally identifiable information. To date, no security breaches have been reported officially, though independent groups have reported finding vulnerabilities. These are the tangible concerns. For those that watched any of the state or federal legislative hearings held for marketplaces for months before and after go live, there was a very common theme amongst each debate. I watched them all the time because it fascinates me to observe people bickering, but I digress. Were exchanges not telling the truth about readiness, or did exchanges not know? I think the answer to this question lies in the organizational structures of each of the exchanges, and my primary speculation here is that exchanges may not have been structured in a manner that would provide definitive answers. The exchange organizations I've witnessed appear to be largely staffed from public agencies, as in folks with backgrounds in government policy and the way government currently does business. Though there are exchanges that did have a hybrid mixture of both public and private resources. So what does this mean? It means that exchanges were responsible for building a business at the same time that they were building a complex solution. And the federally facilitated exchange did not fall into the same business requirement. However, the agency that was responsible for the development of the federal marketplace was also responsible for the development of the Federal Data Services Hub, as well as the oversight and management of each state-based exchange, not to mention dissemination of policy, regulations, and Medicaid expansion. So it's fair to say that regardless of the type of marketplace, each exchange had a large mountain to climb. Each of these items are indicative of those intangible issues that are often more apparent to folks on the ground within each exchange and the industry as a whole. And oftentimes these intangibles are expressions of an organization's maturity. Keep in mind that in order to build these exchanges and in turn marketplaces, most environments operated in silos. Business units developed separately: technology, policy, marketing, legal, finance. It was the only method most organizations could see, that was to divide and conquer. And each of these silos worked fairly well independently, and in many cases successfully, until several months prior to go live, when everyone was thrown into the same pot of boiling water. When you merge the different streams together like that, especially in such a short amount of time and under pressure, you're going to find and create gaps, and oftentimes a business change or a policy change will become a technical change. An example of this was a fairly late decision by the Federal Exchange to require consumers to create an account in order to browse plans. And this resulted in a huge hit to the Data Services Hub, causing a tremendous amount of frustration to consumers trying to purchase insurance. Now, should the technology have been capable of handling the change? Arguably, yes. Was there accurate information with regards to capabilities that were known to the groups making these decisions? In other words, could the powers that be see their environment clearly? That's the unknown. These are the intangibles, all of which I believe is related to leadership's line of sight. In talking about enterprise architecture, or EA, I won't go into too much detail or too deeply on how it's applied. I'll simply elaborate on how line of sight is generated by enterprise architecture, meaning EA provides valuable strategic insight. Enterprise architecture provides a means for understanding all of the different elements that comprise the enterprise and how these elements are interrelated. It enables strategic line of sight leadership, an information asset base further defining the mission, the information necessary to perform the mission, and all components, technology included, necessary to execute objectives and transformational processes in response to changing needs. There's still a lot of discussion about the definition of enterprise architecture, but as the name suggests, EA is independent. It is not tied to a singular organizational function, division, or specialized group. EA is often perceived to be an IT function, yet quite the contrary, it is an enterprise function. It investigates, guides, and helps to revamp and improve functions across the enterprise. Implemented correctly, EA identifies organizational gaps, it analyzes capacity and capability, helps to determine fit for purpose, fit for use, but most importantly, EA can be utilized to determine health and dysfunction within and between functional groups. Interestingly enough, enterprise architecture principles were applied in both of the leadership-enabled exchange environments, though they at times didn't have a name for it. The application of EA principles was used to bridge the organizational silos and orchestrate joint organizational purpose, unifying the efforts of exchange staff, of vendors, of us as consultants, and all project, program, business, financial, legal, and policy stakeholders. In a nutshell, increasing the flexibility of the enterprise and its linkage with external partners, creating unifying and integrating processes across the enterprise, and unlocking the power of information by unifying silos that hinder initiatives. All of them are tenets of enterprise architecture. So let's do this. Let's address the elephant in the room. And by elephant in the room, I really mean let's look at the data. Let's look at the data pre-go live, let's look at the data at go live, and let's look at the data post-go live. And really what we're examining here is the element of leadership. One of the things that I did when I was pulling all this information together, and I physically sat with exchanges and watched the implementation of the last few years, was to kind of divide out and look at two different categories of leadership. And we're really talking about leadership-enabled environments and leadership-deficient environments. And one thing that is pretty clear from the data is that leadership-enabled environments have cleaner technology. They have technology that is easier to implement. They have technology that is easier to maintain. Leadership-challenged environments have a much harder time implementing and managing change in their environments to their technology. So it's a very important component, especially when we start looking at the life of the ACA law as it stands right now, and that we can pretty much guess and know that there's going to be changes, and possibly very substantial changes, leading up to 2020, because that's the baseline of how long the law is physically spread as far as changes to environments and the impact that it will have on exchanges. And what will end up happening after 2020, is a little bit of an unknown as far as how exchanges will operate. But within the guidelines of federal government, within the guidelines of CMS, we're looking at the 2020 mark as really the telltale sign to know what changes are happening or what changes will be happening within the environments based off of what we know that's established in the law itself. Addressing the elephant in the room is all about data and examining practices that were either common or singular to exchange environments. The intent of the research I performed during my tenure as a student of enterprise architecture at Penn State was to evaluate the leadership performance of exchanges. My research tested the leadership results of 7 state exchanges and the federal exchange by rating the performance of each using these leadership principles. I utilized the data and the activities from 7 of the original 19 exchanges, chosen due to the accessibility of substantial amounts of information and the availability of subject matter experts. The results of my analysis are represented through 3 focus categories: leadership enabled, leadership underperformed, and leadership challenged. 2 states operated leadership enabled environments. The remaining 5 states operated in leadership challenged environments. The federally facilitated exchange fell within the leadership underperformed category. Now, the disparity between the challenged group and the underperforming federally facilitated exchange was much greater than I had hypothesized. The average composite score for the leadership challenged group was 9.6, or 38%, as opposed to the federally facilitated exchange with a composite score of 17, or 68%. It seems logical that a contributor to the disparity is related to the creation of new organizations, as each state exchange essentially built and developed a complex solution and organization simultaneously. Keep in mind that the federal exchange is comprised of a backbone of individuals operating within a structure more than 35 years old, so I thought my hypothesis made good sense. I soon realized that my logic made no sense. That logic doesn't hold water when the comparison is expanded to include the leadership enabled group, with an average composite score of 21, or 84%. These 2 brand new organizations built a business and a complex solution simultaneously. Why were they able to do it? I now believe that the explanation lies in the structural leadership and organizational differences the leadership enabled group has in comparison to the other 2 groups. The impact of the disparity between the 3 groups with regards to system implementation was fairly dramatic. All groups experienced some level of difficulty at, or prior to, or after go live, as many system launches do. I likened it to levels of turmoil. So level 1 turmoil means it's critical, as in serious trouble, something's wrong, it's not working, and you're not certain how to fix it. What to target for first, or even how long it will take to resolve. Level 2 turmoil means that it's quite serious, but you have a pretty good idea of what the issue is and can estimate time to resolution. And then level 3 means it's high priority, but the system is still up. You know what to do, and you can resolve it or provide a contingency quickly. Each group experienced level 1 turmoil at some point during the first few days of turning the lights on, as in go live. And here's the difference. The challenged group took the longest to bring systems back online and struggled the most with keeping their application, functions, and components running. They maintained the longest list of system errors, have the most defects and incidents per system, the least amount of congruency and policy compliance, have underdeveloped policies, and have rampant workaround processes, and are still working through performance, consistency, and user capacity problems to this day. The leadership deficient group also had substantial problems bringing stability to their environment, had an unanticipated amount of trouble connecting disparate components of the system together, and took longer than expected to reach a level of adequate performance, consistency, and user capability. Now, the leader-enabled group, as you've likely anticipated, experienced the least amount of trouble keeping their application, functions, and components running, maintained the shortest list of defects and incidents per system, had adequate congruency and policy development and compliance with adequately developed and refined system policies, and had a minimal amount of workaround processes. Performance and capacity issues experienced were resolved quickly, and their systems have remained highly available post-traumatic go-live. Between the two exchanges that comprise the leadership-enabled group, only one rated below average one time in one principle. I took this to mean that those two exchanges under the leadership-enabled focus group share a strong understanding and ability to practically apply modern leadership theory. What I didn't understand was why. So all of this is leading up to a very, very important impetus moment. And that is to say that maturity matters. Maturity in an organization matters. And building maturity takes very strong, dedicated, and planned leadership. A lot of the aspects of what we do as leaders in this environment and in any environment is to project vision, is to project mission, and it's to encourage and provide a basis or a ground for being successful and bringing success within our organizations and also bearing the fruit of our products and services. So maturity is extremely important. It is what allows us to do what it is we do. It's something that Amazon shares, Google shares, and Apple shares. It's something that our government to a certain extent has done with their model of management and their model of leadership. But that model of management and model of leadership is approaching about the 40-year mark. So it's a model that is aged, and it's a model that we can't maintain if we're to move forward and do some of those advanced things and do some of the things that we should do to lead us into the next century. So let's examine maturity and how to perpetuate maturity in our environments. So, maturity matters. Keep in mind that exchanges are essentially supposed to be self-sufficient businesses. Why should exchanges care about their maturity or how they stack up today as long as they know where they're going? That's simple. Where you are today determines the time, effort, resources, and change required to reach organizational mission, goals, and objectives, all essential to creating value. Assessing maturity is to understand where you are as an organization, as in your as-is state, so that you can begin to develop the path to moving your organization to your intended state, your future state. So this is a bit out of scope for the research that I initially performed, but I've started to analyze the hiring practices between leadership-enabled and leadership-deficient exchanges. And my preliminary research is focused on one area, the professional skill attainment as an experience by position across the different functional groups in each exchange. Technical professionals seem to share the most similarities between backgrounds, regardless of whether or not it's a management or development position. However, the discrepancy appears to be the greatest between organizational leadership positions. Leadership-enabled exchanges have the most divergent leadership teams. These folks had experience all over the place and across industries. Each held a nearly equal mix between persons with predominantly government-based backgrounds and persons with backgrounds predominantly in private industry. This seems to imply that the melding of mentalities, as in merging the mind of a person with business startup know-how with a person with years of government policy and program management experience, is of substantial benefit and value to an exchange organization. It appears that this difference may have been the spark that enabled agility and nimbleness. Maturity models aside, I grow more and more fascinated in the extreme differences between each exchange environment, specifically the culture that governs their interactions. Edgar Schein wrote, "When we are influential in shaping the behavior and the values of others, we think of that as leadership. and are creating the conditions for new cultural formation. That is an important statement as it solidifies that the culture that is created in an organization directly impacts that organization's ability to create stability and rigidity, and is something that is taught. In these exchange environments, we know that the nature of what is being produced and the culture that is created supplies both the taxonomy and the foundation for behavioral expectations. And to go one step further, culture and leadership is the connection that appears to determine their ability to achieve objectives. And it seems apparent that an organization's goal attainment is the result of leadership's imposed normalization of the organization's environment. With respect to exchanges, culture was created, it was embedded, it was evolved and manipulated by leadership. Shine also stated, culture creation and management are the essence of leadership and make you realize that leadership and culture are two sides of the same coin. In leadership-enabled exchanges, culture created structure, culture created constraints, culture created expectations, and culture provided meaning. And most importantly, dysfunction was identified and appropriately managed. Hang on, let me say that one more time. Dysfunction was identified and appropriately managed. So now we're at the point where we're looking at the challenge. What is the challenge? We've talked a lot about technology, and we've talked a lot about what technology has meant to marketplaces and exchanges. I don't think that the solution we're looking for is to expand the horizons of technical professionals in government work. I don't think that's necessarily the answer. If you have more technologically savvy professionals, that's wonderful. You'll have increased innovation probably, and you'll have faster results. You'll make products faster. The problem is there's still a high probability that you're not going to find the success that you should find because the component of leadership is still absent, or it's not functioning to the full extent that it probably should function. So there will be some economies gained, of course, by having advanced technically savvy professionals in government environments. However, that's not the basis of the change that needs to happen. If you look at other relative instances in our past, TiVo is a wonderful example. We all still use the term TiVo when we're talking about something that's coming out on television or a new show that's about to start. We all say, I've got to get home, I've got to TiVo it. We don't actually have TiVo machines in our homes anymore. We have DVRs, but we still use that term. That term is very, very strong for us. Why don't we have TiVo systems in our home? It's a very, very good question, and it's a question that I'm sure that organization or the company that produced TiVo systems, I'm sure that's a question that they probably ask themselves very frequently, because the leadership component, and it's specifically the enterprise architecture component that should have given that line of sight that we've discussed earlier, did not see a pitfall that probably should have been addressed. So let's take a closer look at that. Let's look at the challenge that's before us, and let's find a good means to attack it. The challenge. Is it really an issue of more technical professionals? We've already discussed the possible outcome that adding more technically savvy professionals might provide quicker or fancier results, but that doesn't guarantee greater levels of success, or that an initiative will meet its objectives, or absolve an organization from failure. So looking again at TiVo's example, technology is as responsible for the troubles experienced by exchanges as the legal and marketing departments were responsible for TiVo's decline. Legal issues over patent control and marketing themselves essentially out of the market were contributing factors for the collapse of TiVo as a brand. As a consultant in the field, as an enterprise architect, and as a technologist, no, I do not believe it is as simple as a complex technical issue. It is an issue of line of sight empowered leadership. An organization requires the health and the agility of all of the units that comprise that organization. It is the role of leaders within an organization to hold vision and determine what is needed to happen to execute their objectives and meet their mission. With this in mind, if the goal is to create a model of government that increases self-reliance and sufficiency, which are universal regardless of functional area, does this not imply the criticality of enterprise leadership maturity? The critical component that was absent from the initial rollout was not the absence of technical knowledge, but the absence of enterprise architecture. Moreover, the absence of line of sight leadership, perpetuating the lack of vision that could have identified deficiencies. Effective execution of enterprise architecture and leadership-enabled organizational structure could have fulfilled a substantial role in mitigating the complexities of overwhelming change. The leadership-enabled exchange examples are evidence of that. Exchanges share one common goal. Though some positioned themselves more proactively or strategically and worked to mitigate barriers and inhibitors from their environment, they experienced similar difficulties to their leadership-challenged counterparts. Leadership-enabled exchanges, however, consistently found ways to mitigate those challenges by leveraging their organizational structures and resources. So where do we go from here? That's the big question, right? It's the question that we've been working towards answering the entire time that you and I have shared together. It's an important question. I think that there is, as we will find, I think there is a very strong application for what our government was able to do with marketplaces, regardless of politics and how you feel about the law itself. We motivated the government to do something and operate outside of standard modes of operation. Very, very important and very, very critical point. I think that this process, what we've followed, can be adjusted and amended and changed to fit different scenarios. So we've got to be able to deliver this method. We've got to be able to communicate with each other and to build the leadership models that will bring the type of technologies and the innovations that we're asking for and we're asking our government to produce, which is really what we're talking about. We want changes. We want technological changes. We want advancements. We want innovation. But we have to learn as a society, as an organization, as a leadership body, we have to learn how to perpetuate these changes. And we have to motivate our government and motivate the way that we interact with government to produce these types of changes. All very important things, all very critical things. So I think that what we're able to do here, what we have been able to do, is going to translate very nicely into other avenues, specifically what our government is able to produce in the future and how our government will build technology and interact with us as citizens. Where does this leave us? The work of exchanges and the expansion of marketplaces is by no means finished. And speaking of failures for just a moment, it's amazing how afraid of failing we are. No matter how many years we have under our belts, failure is hard to stomach. And our government getting something wrong, much less failing, is simply out of the question. It fascinated me when the media and legislators called the implementation of the ACA a failure. Why? Because it didn't work out of the box? Lots of brands making new products have failed out of the box. iPhones did 3 generations or so ago with the weird bumper issue. If your hand covered the spot where the antenna was, it dropped your call. That was a failure, one that took them months to correct. But it was a failure that had absolutely no impact on iPhone sales. Folks accepted it, lined up, and laid their money on the counter. Failure is only negative when you don't learn anything. I'm not suggesting that we accept failure as an MO. I am suggesting that we examine failure, that we examine this supposed failure, because if we truly want a modern government, we have to be proactive and be prepared if things don't go quite right. And we have to be engaged and come to the table and work through them. In my mind, was it a failure? No. Highly turbulent? Yeah. The October 1st release is one of many to come. There's still substantial functionality that will be released leading up to and potentially beyond the year 2020. Numerous ACA policies are slated to take effect within what remains of the 10-year timeline. Marketplaces will continue to evolve and will continue to encounter similar challenges that proved debilitating during the initial rollout against the existing leadership model. The ACA is an unparalleled national implementation. It is likely not an anomaly, but rather an opportunity to help restructure the way both federal and local governments do business. This is arguably a very critical indicator of how government will need to evolve in order to meet the divergent needs of our nation. The continuous and ongoing application of enterprise architecture solves one of the most difficult challenges of modern times. Make sure that senior leaders can bring about the changes needed to deliver the strategies they have promised to their stakeholders. In closing, there are a couple of things we need to keep in mind, specifically that EA and the role that is still left to play. Firstly, marketplaces will continue to evolve for the next 6 years as they have been provisioned to do so by the government. There's still functionality that is scheduled to be released. And indeed, similar issues will still be important factors for each implementation. Finally, this is a somewhat unparalleled national initiative. It was rocky, and it was painful, and it continues to be that way for some implementations. But it did happen, and it will likely be the example, the good and the bad, for future national initiatives. I believe and I hope that EA will have a very big hand in that. I truly enjoyed our time together. Thank you very, very much. Good luck to you and all of your endeavors.